what has happened last night. We were supposed to have a devastating, massive attack, U.S. attack on Iran, and going after power grids and infrastructures, civilian infrastructures in Iran, because Donald Trump wanted to put a lot of pressure on Iranian government to accept his deal. We don't know what does that mean. Even I was questioning what is that, and maybe you can answer that. And the other point is he said that Iran, together with Middle Eastern countries, they contacted him. They told him, please don't do that, and he has decided to cancel the attack. And here is what we've learned. And in the same statement that he published today, he said that the Strait of Hormuz is open right now. They're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And here is just moments ago, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson, Bakai, he said that Iran is close to reaching an understanding with Oman on managing the Strait of Hormuz. The first point. The second point is reaching an out reaching an understanding does not mean that the strait will be opened, and it will remain closed until we deem it appropriate. And Iran did not request anything from the United States, and Trump backed down due to Iran's military strength. And if the United States dares to commit a foolish act of aggression, our crushing response will affect the entire region, which they were talking about it. If you attack us, we're going to destroy all infrastructure. They were talking about oil facilities in the region. And looking at this situation right now, what is your perception? What does that mean when Donald Trump he says that they're going to agree, they have to accept my deal? What does that mean for you?
Well, I think that there's a lot of what the attorney Robert Barnes uh, calls confession through projection. You know, it's looking in the mirror and yelling at yourself subconsciously, because I don't think that Iran has been reaching out at all. I think he's making up this like an inner dialogue. I think that his mind is not what it was even a couple of years ago. But from the Iranian point, uh, the memorandum of understanding is dead, but in the sense that it's now the starting line. Any agreement that comes in the future will include all of the previous memorandum of understanding and even more conditions, because Iran's position is stronger now. No, there's no question. So, memorandum of understanding, point number 5, very explicitly, and Trump on video signed this, the exact words. It says that Iran will administer the Strait of Hormuz, for 60 days, no fees, which would be a point of like letting the ships that are in go out without a penalty. 60 days, you can leave. And that they would conduct a dialogue with Oman, not share administrating, but conduct a dialogue with Oman and also confer with other Gulf states. But that the main point is Iran administers the Strait of Hormuz. Nowhere in point 5 does it say that the U.S. has any role whatsoever, zero. So the memorandum point 5 was blown up when we tried to slip this South Oman channel through without consulting at all in any way with Iran. That was when the kinetic action began, because Iran agreed we administer it. Nowhere does it say asterisk the U.S. Navy can go through the bottom. And by the way, it's to me, it's very I don't know if the word is dishonorable, but it's less than courageous to tell big, slow tankers to take the Oman Channel, the narrow southern Oman Channel, to go out when our own warships won't do it. If it's safe for an LNG tanker, then it must be safe for an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Since the February 28th war, the only times we've had destroyers approach the Strait of Hormuz was during the ceasefire, when there were actual negotiations occurring. I guess the calculus was, while President or Vice President Vance is in Islamabad, there's no way they're going to fire on an American ship. that day. So we have had destroyers zip in and zip out of the Strait of Hormuz. The second time that they tried it, I think that it's still debatable whether they were fired on or had fire control locked on them. But we don't send our warships through. But we are telling big, slow tankers, unarmed tankers, to use this channel that our warships won't use, which to me is a big problem. Now, my understanding of the new talks with Oman is that all the ships will have to go in on the Iranian route. That's the Larak Island between Larak and Keshem Island to go in, which gives Iran the chance to examine every ship and give permission or not. Because I think the bottom line for Iran, one of their bottom lines, is going to be they will never allow U.S. warships back into the Persian Gulf, ever. That's a dead end now. That the Fifth Fleet headquarters at Bahrain, which was wrecked and evacuated, the American personnel sent home, the Navy personnel are either out on ships or out of Bahrain. But I don't think we're ever going to see American warships docking in Bahrain again. And as well, they don't want ships bringing war material in, for example, to Kuwait or other, the UAE or any of the countries in the Gulf. I mean, during Desert Storm, 1991, the port of Jubail was just a massive port for American war material. We spent months unloading, tanks, artillery shells, everything to support troops. We spent months. And
Yeah, it seems that we've lost Matt. Let me see if he's gonna get back here. I think it's a problem with his connection. As he said, he's in a hotel room right now, and I assume. Yeah, I think he's gonna be back. Let me just check it out here. And I'm gonna focus today on the American bases in the region because Matt has a lot of information on those bases. And basically, if the United States decides to stay in the region, they have to do something about it. If not, it means that the United States is changing its policy. We know that Saudi Arabia is so much concerned. They talked with Donald Trump last night. MBS talked with Donald Trump, and we had other governments in the region calling Donald Trump as well because they know any sort of escalation means that their economy going to be devastated, going to be influenced by the war. And what I was somehow surprised about it was the Israeli participation in the war. Just moments ago, before coming to this live, we had a new report on the Israeli media. It says that an Israeli security source told the Khan News is that President Donald Trump's decision to cancel a planned large scale strike on Iran is damaging operational readiness and undermining military planning. It means that it says that Israel was preparing for this attack for weeks. They were preparing everything, and then Donald Trump, all of a sudden, he has decided to cancel that. They are not happy about it. And we don't know how much of what they're talking about is truth, how much I don't. You remember when the war started in February, on February 28th, there was a problem with Israeli because as time went by during the war, Israelis were fading away from the conflict. They were just somehow, it was all the burden came, on Americans. Then Israelis were mostly focused on Lebanon and the southern part of Lebanon because in those days they were trying to do some sort of operations in the southern part of Lebanon, which was confronted by Hezbollah. And we remember Hezbollah was using FPV drones, which turned into some sort of a strategic problem for Israel. as it was mentioned by Israeli ambassador at the UN. He said that they're using these drones. We don't have any solution for that. They're not just hitting, the weapons. They're hitting the batteries, Iron Dome batteries, and the air defenses. And together with, Israeli forces, casualties, a lot of Israeli soldiers were killed in the latest days of the war in southern part of Lebanon before this so-called ceasefire happening. So I think basically what's going on, and here is Matt is back here.
Yeah, I'm sorry
You're
about
back.
that.
You're back.
Sorry about
Go
that.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm in a
You
hotel. But yeah, I was saying during the 1991 Persian Gulf War, the port of Jubail was just massively, and other ports in Saudi Arabia, just the entire American merchant fleet was bringing war material in. And in one case before, it was first called Desert Shield, then called Desert Storm when America went on the attack. There was a Scud missile that actually landed in the water very close to a huge pier, a pier that's as big as like several football fields long, that was loaded with artillery shells and rockets and things like that. And so the Scud missiles at that time were very inaccurate. And it was just by luck that it landed in the water, 100 meters from this pier full of shells, artillery. If that had hit the pier, it would have devastated the port of Jubail and killed thousands of Americans, without a doubt. But that was 1991. Today, Iran can absolutely pinpoint a single barracks building or hangar, with a missile that has greater range and payload than those Scuds. And this has completely changed the entire balance of power, in the region. There's no way that Jubail or Kuwait City or anywhere is going to be another American military outpost. That's also in the former Memorandum of Understanding is the eventual closing of these bases. And I made a map that shows about 15 American bases from Jordan to Kuwait to Oman, and already some of them have been evacuated, like Bahrain, Erbil in Syria, or excuse me, Iraq, is being evacuated. Bases we've had for years, and I think when this is over, the U.S. is going to be out of the region. I don't see. Trump can say that we're going to open the Strait of Hormuz. When the Strait of Hormuz is open, it's going to be, I think, controlled by Iran, and there will be no American warships or ships loaded with American military material ever again going into the Persian Gulf.
Yeah. Let me bring up the map that you have shared on your X account about the American bases. This is what you prepared, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes.
Then here we see all of these bases around Iran. I think the most important ones would be, one of them is in Erbil, and because it's close to the western part of Iran. In the western
Right.
part of Iran, there were many attacks from Kuwait using HIMARS, attacking the western part of it, the state of Khuzestan, which is so close to the Iraqi border. It can be targeted from from Kuwait.
And also,
And
Erbil is also close to the Caspian ports and rail links and so forth, and the city of Tabriz.
yeah. And when it comes to American bases there, we've learned recently that they're going to remove all these Patriot systems from Iraqi Kurdistan, which is Erbil, which is the northern part of the Iraq, is, as you see in this picture, is Erbil. It's called Erbil Harir Air Base, Al Harir Air Base, as they call it. And how do you think that, are they gonna, if I'm not mistaken, they have 5 Patriot systems still there in Iraqi Kurdistan, and it said that in the same report they said that they're gonna remove them by September. It means that nobody gonna be there to stay there to support. I don't know what would happen to the airbase. What is your understanding of that?
Well, I think that two of maybe the most important videos I've seen in the last week were by MIT professor Ted Postol. One was with Colonel Dan Davis on his Deep Dive podcast, and I think one was with Mario on his podcast.
It was with me.
Oh, sorry.
The second, yeah.
Your brother from across the water there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I once I called him Nima when I was on his show. So, sorry. But those are fantastic videos, because I think we're coming to the conclusion that the Patriot defense system, as well as the THAAD system, has been basically a fraud. That they've been claiming a success rate which is not deserved. So if you say that the Patriot is 90% effective, but in reality you've known all along it was 10% effective or less, as Professor Postal says, then what should Korea and Japan and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait think about the billions of dollars they've spent? If I was selling the police a bulletproof vest, but it was just made out of cotton and didn't stop bullets, they would test it and say, well, look, we're not buying these bulletproof vests. They're not bulletproof. But how do you test a Patriot? You make up a story about the Scuds in Desert Storm that's false, as Ted Postal's been diagnosing and dissecting, and then you sell this system. So we've seen troops that were supposed to be protected by Patriots killed and injured. And I don't think that whether there are Patriots in Erbil or not, have they really worked? Are they effective? And as Dr. Postal says, when you add in the hypersonic factor and the Chinese GPS guidance, when they're in hypersonic mode, the warhead has a little rocket motor speeding it up on the last 30 seconds, and the Patriot can't deal with it. And they can also now maneuver and make some turns on their way down. The Patriot can't deal with that either. So we're gradually, and this has not reached the American television audience yet, only the people that study these military affairs, that the Patriot hasn't been working. So the Patriots that are left, I think they're going to move back to the Jordan air bases and of course Israel, because we've moved our air tankers, our air refuelers further and further back until they're in Jordan. That was the purpose of Iran's strikes like last week in the Jordan I can't pronounce it, Mawafti Salti air base, that the famous videos came out. And another big story from this war, I think it will be massive. It doesn't make sense in military terms to have only 14 killed in action compared to hundreds have been medically evacuated. And the only explanation for this is that I can see is that the injuries are blast injuries. That if you have 1 or 2 minute warning, or maybe even 5 minute warning, you might get away from the hangar full of jet aircraft that you think might be a target. But there's no true bunkers on the west side of the Persian Gulf, like underground, like inside of a mountain, the way that they're built in Iran. In the Gulf region, they're just built. The military bases are built above ground, and even the bunkers are, for example, concrete blast barriers that are like a wall, or even just sandbags. So these will protect a soldier that's has a 1 or 2 or 3 minute warning. They may protect him from the fragments of material that's flying through the air, and then you won't have a traumatic injury like amputation. But it will not protect you against a blast. You can be on the other side of a wall, but the blast wave is still going to really really injure you badly. So you might not be bleeding out in the sense that your arm was blown off, but you have such an overpressure blast, and in Dr. Postal's videos, he was showing pictures of like Tel Aviv or Washington and explaining the PSI, the pounds per square inch, and the different damage that is done to buildings. The same thing could be done for humans that are just within a certain radius of that explosion, even if they're on the other side of a concrete barrier. It doesn't protect them from the blast wave, just from the debris, the flying debris, but not the blast wave. So I think that a big story of this war is going to be how many of our American soldiers and contractors and local, there's also many local employees hired locally that are going to be suffering from the traumatic brain injury and other blast effects, which can have lifelong consequences. Personality change, balance issues, attention issues, and these can be very devastating. And I think right now it's not being covered in the American media whatsoever. What happened to those hundreds of troops that were evacuated to Germany? Who's visiting them? What's their story? Now they're talking about taking away their smartphones, their cell phones, so that they can't shoot video like we saw from the Jordan Air Base. But this is really just for the American media audience, because it's insignificant to Iran whether an American posts a video or not, because local Jordanians and anybody in any country that's watching the missile come down and is shooting video, these are then posted to the internet, and it's super easy to geolocate the exact impact point. Unlike in Desert Storm, where there was some question about how we could fake that missiles were hitting at different places. You can't fake that anymore. Now, because of people taking cell phone videos, and as well as the Iranians sitting with Chinese and Russians looking at the satellite pictures, they can determine their accuracy to within meters. So it doesn't matter if the American troops have a smartphone or not. You can't hide the exact location. And then after a few days, the commercial satellite images come out and show that the exact building was struck or the exact radar site. So this is why I think Trump is backing down. In the American media, what they're saying is that Crown Prince MBS has spoken to Trump and said, don't do it because the region will be wrecked. The desal plants will be out of commission, and we'll have, the water will be a big problem. But another thing that happened just a few days ago was this drone strike on Damietta, Egypt, which was on the other side of the Suez Canal, further from Iran. So if you look at whether the Houthis fired it or the Iranians fired it, it was only a drone, which is, the Russians have jet engine models, but primarily the Iranians are piston engine propeller drones. They're very slow, low flying. If it flew all the way across Egypt or out on the Mediterranean and then into Egypt to strike Damietta, then it could have struck anywhere in the Suez Canal area, anywhere in Egypt. But what it struck was an LNG facility that's a converted LNG tanker that's converted for regasification. So it's a ship. It has propellers, but it's basically just permanently parked, for years. If they change contracts or do something else, it could be moved elsewhere. But it's part of Egypt's regasification. So an LNG tanker from Qatar or wherever, or a pipeline from Qatar, the tanker loads onto this regasification unit, and then that's turned into natural gas and put into Egypt's grid for power plants, for factories, for anybody using natural gas in Egypt. If that had been not a drone, but a Karamshar, Kaibar, missile that struck like Ted Postal was describing, hitting Washington or Tel Aviv, then the energy of that LNG could be released in a massive explosion, a kilotons explosion that would wreck the Damietta port area. and cut off Egypt's natural gas as well. You know, these facilities, any LNG facilities, all over them, it's saying no smoking, right? Obviously, right? But they have firefighting systems on them because if something got out of control on one of these ships, the fire has to be put out immediately. You know, any kind of a leak, all the piping, any kind of off-gassing, they have to have firefighting. So firing a drone at this thing was strictly a warning, a love tap, just a gentle, polite warning that the same thing could happen with a medium-range ballistic missile and devastate that area. And since this drone flew past the Suez Canal, the same missile could hit, and this is important, this was an American-owned, I think it's Marshall Island flagged, but American-owned, this LNG thing that was hit in Damietta. If an American ship in the Suez Canal was struck, I mean, if America and Iran are going to go to a full air war, you know, just no holds barred, then a ship in the Suez Canal struck by one of these missiles, and it would be easy because they're going in a straight line at only a few miles an hour, right? It's not like an aircraft carrier going 40 miles an hour and turning all the time. This is in the Suez Canal going less than 10 miles an hour. So it's very easy computation. If a ship is hit with a hypersonic in the Suez Canal, it'll be blown up. You know, the Evergreen container ship, the Ever Given, this is like 5 years ago, it just turned the wrong way and got buried in the sand, but the ship wasn't damaged. They just had to bring out bulldozers and scoop out sand and turn the ship, but that closed the Suez Canal for a week. But if a ship is blown up in the Suez Canal, and there's a war still going on, so tomorrow another ship could be blown up. If you cleared that one, another one will be blown up. You know, I'm old enough to remember, I was only 10 at the time, but the 1967, what they called the 6-Day War, when Israel seized the Sinai and Golan Heights in Syria, the Suez Canal was out of action for 7 years. It was out of action until after the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur War. So, you know, in living memory, the executives of all these companies, guys my age, they all know the Suez Canal can be closed. And if the Suez Canal and Bab al-Mandab, the Gate of Tears, and the Strait of Hormuz, if they're all closed, then Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are screwed completely, because what oil would be getting out of Saudi Arabia can't go through on small ships through the Suez Canal if it's blocked. And an important consideration also is a lot of the finished products and food that is eaten in the Gulf states comes through the Suez Canal from Europe and other places. So any container ships that are coming with finished products from America or Europe coming to the Gulf via the Red Sea and then the Strait of Hormuz, all three are blocked off. That region is wrecked. Whereas Iran is still connected to a dozen countries with land borders and the Caspian Sea.